welcome. This is Zadel and welcome to this month's video success tip. You know, the past week I've been traveling around the country on tour with one of our experts, and a number of different articles, different stories and different thoughts have come to my head that have sort of fermented to bring about what I'm going to be talking about here today. And I'm going to start by asking you this first question, is this. What is wealth? And it's quite an interesting question. You know, if we go back about 100 years or so, I mean, society seems to have changed completely in that time frame. If we go back 100 years or so, wealth was generally probably a wealthy farmer, maybe a tradesman of some sort or a small business owner. And that wealthy farmer had crops. They produced a lot of, if not all of their own food. They probably had a fair few animals as well, be it for trade or for food or for whatever as well. And now fast forward over 100 years, now we've completely migrated almost completely from the land. You know, it's completely, whereas 100 people used to work on the land, now, 95 probably worked on the land and 5 people in whatever, some sort of administration type role. Now it's the reverse. 95% of people work in administration or cities versus those on the land, about 5% or less. Don't know the exact figures, but you get the feel for what I'm saying. And these days everyone's chasing money, you know, from the 80s onwards it's certainly taken off. You know, the Gordon Gekko greed is good type thing, and it's all about money. Well, I think it's really interesting to ask this question, well, what is wealth? Is wealth the number of digits in your bank account? I mean, the citizens of Cyprus certainly learnt last year that digits in a bank account weren't as valuable as they thought they were. And when they disappeared, when the banks closed overnight and decided to help themselves to some of the clients' money at the government's discretion. So is that wealth? Is it the amount of property that you own? Is it the quality of food that you eat? Is it the possessions that you own? And now I'm thinking about a couple of stories that have played into all of this and about the current system that we're being indoctrinated into. So a couple of questions, or a couple of thoughts. So last week I had dinner with one of our more successful clients, had dinner with his lovely wife and their 2 young children. Now this gentleman actually immigrated out from Vietnam a long time ago, and we were just talking about dinner and all this sort of stuff, and he said, you know what, he said, I couldn't believe it. When I got here to Australia, he said the food, the fruit and the vegetables, he said, were terrible. They tasted bland, they tasted like cardboard compared to his own native homeland of Vietnam. Now isn't that interesting? We're in a park in Sydney having home-cooked, prepared organic food that he loved to cook and bring to our picnic. Yet back there in Vietnam, which we would, people would argue is probably a lesser developed country or not as wealthy on average, or what the West perceives as wealth, yet they've got better quality food. Fresh, straight off the tree, very few fertilizers and pesticides on a commercial scale, and a lot of it homegrown. Here he comes to an advanced Western society that's wealthy, and the quality of food is less. Now, of course, this has been highlighted absolutely this week with the frozen berries being contaminated and perhaps causing hepatitis B and a number of other issues due to a lot of the chemicals being used on it. It turns out wherever those chemicals used, they weren't in Australia, although you'd be wanting to check into the ones that are used here and if they are in fact much better at all, or we just haven't learnt what they do yet. But a lot of these berries sourced maybe from China, maybe from Chile, and causing a lot of illness. Now, why are they sourcing berries all the way from across the world? Well, it comes down to money. They can produce them cheaper, probably due to Australian labour costs and versus over in those other countries. And you go, all right, well, it's cheaper and I make more wealth because I have more digits in my bank account. But what is wealth? Is wealth the number of digits in your bank account, or is it the state of your health? I want to give you another story. A gentleman that came to my experience. I run a once-a-year 3-day event called The Experience. It's 25 years of my knowledge, time, effort, study and money into one all-encompassing personal development event. And a gentleman there is a very wealthy vineyard owner south of Perth in WA. And during the course of that event, he came up to me and said, Stuart, you know, one of my greatest achievements last year was making my own organic apricot jam from my ancient organic apricot trees and gifting it to my friends. So here's a gentleman who's a wealthy, successful wine label vineyard owner, yet his greatest joy in life was growing his own food and giving it to his friends. And I ask you again the question, you know, what is wealth? Now, another story I want to quickly bring to you is from this week's book of the month. I think there's few people that don't acknowledge that something's not right in the world, and this week's book of the month is by Russell Brand, Revolution, UK comedian, and a guy with some pretty interesting points of view, and I highly recommend you get this book. And he talks in it about how the system is basically it's completely broke. The financial system's broke, the food system's broke, and it's been set up to serve an elite minority, not the majority of us on the planet. And he gives the case here of apples. Apples that are grown in Britain are flown to South Africa to be cleaned and waxed, and then flown back to be sold and eaten in Britain. I mean, does that make sense? Picking an apple off a tree, putting it on a plane, flying it internationally, doing something to it, and then bringing it back to be sold? Isn't this just crazy? Clearly the system, the money to do that. And you're going to say, well, why is that allowed to happen? Well, obviously the taxes, the import duties and whatever are benefiting certain people, be it governments or individuals or the elite, that are making money when this stuff changes hands. Obviously, it'd be much better if the local farmer just sold his local apples at the markets. Now, we've got all sorts of places where we can buy that in Australia, and we've got companies that claim to be the fresh food people, but many of these companies sell what's called birthday apples. Many don't know an apple sits up to a year in storage in Australia in cooling and is treated with chemicals to keep them shiny, bright and new, and in fact they call them birthday apples. Again, a very different quality to that you would pick straight off your tree. So where am I going with all this? I'm talking about what is wealth. One more story I wanted to bring me back to New Year's Eve this year. I sat with a group of friends, about a dozen of us, at a friend's house. Now, we had beautifully prepared, mostly raw, organic, vegan, absolute beautiful food. And I sat there by the fireplace with my friends, and I was just thinking, no amount of money could buy this experience. I don't care if you've got billions of dollars, you could not buy your way into that group of friendship and that party, and to have food prepared with love that took all day to prepare, that was organic, that was raw. I think no restaurant in the country can match the quality, or even I think the presentation of that food. It was just absolutely divine. And I just sat there and I'm thinking about this whole thing, what is wealth? So for your next purchase and involvement in property, I want you to think about what really is wealth, what is valuable to me. So I'm going to suggest some things. Wealth comes in many forms, which we've said before. One of them in particular is your food. So your next property purchase, I'm not so sure you always have to be looking for a return on investment financially. I'm going to suggest you might want to go and buy an acre block of land somewhere and start growing your own food. Heck, many of you already live in one right now where you could start doing this. So I'm going to give you a challenge in a moment. Now, if that's too pricey for you, see, one of the reasons I think you want to get wealthy, if you're going to play by this system for now, is you want to grow your own food. I think that's very, very important. If you don't grow your own food, I want you to buy organic. Now, when you buy organics, you will be paying a little bit more than the average food. Now, not in all cases. Some organics are pretty much the same price, can even be cheaper on occasion. But in general, you'll pay 30 to 50% more, sometimes double and even sometimes more than that. And you say, well, that's expensive. And I say, well, again, what is wealth? Okay, so that's a choice you've got to make. Now, the next one I want to suggest you do is maybe buy an acre of land somewhere and have a farmer farm it for you. You can come to a joint venture arrangement where you can split the proceeds from either what's sold, if you choose to do that, or just split the produce. Someone will farm it and grow stuff for you, and you take the rest for your family. And it comes to my challenge in a moment. And then the other idea I want to give you is what's called sharecrop farming, or something like that. I'll call it sharecropping. Sharecropping. So there's a number of co-ops where you can invest in, and you own a title in the land, and they have a professional farmer and they're growing all their own food, and then you can actually buy food off that property at a greatly reduced price because you're one of the shareholders or co-op owners in that property. I'm aware of many of these, or several of them, around the Tweed Valley, south of the Gold Coast, northern New South Wales region of Australia, and I'm sure there's many anywhere, everywhere, if you start looking into it. So the question is, what is wealth? Final thing I want to leave you with today is this. My challenge to you is to believe it or not, is produce most of your own food. Yeah, I'm absolutely 100% very dead set serious about this. If any of you saw the TV series I often talk about called The First Settlers, it was like a documentary reality show they did where they took groups of Australians and put them on the riverbanks, I think of the Parramatta River in Sydney, up the stream there, and got them to live as they lived when the first settlers came to Australia. I mean, they had very modest housing. I think they had to build it themselves. They worked hard, they tilled the land, they grew their food, they built their houses, they did everything. And at the end of this experiment, I think within 6 weeks even, these people were the fittest they had ever been. They were the healthiest they have ever been. They loved the food, they loved the hard work. Mentally, they were keen and alert, and generally, they were the happiest they had ever been. So isn't that really an interesting dichotomy here to think about where we've come from, where we've been, and perhaps where we're going? And I think maybe in this case, history might repeat itself, and it will for the good if you take that decision. So I'll leave you with that question. What is wealth to you? This is Stuart, to your success.